My name is Alan Jones, and I'm pleased to be joined today by Alessandra Pompili as part of our continuing project celebrating the works of Alan Hovhaness. In coming months, we will be exploring the life of Alan Hovhaness, who grew up in Arlington and became an internationally known composer, honored at Carnegie Hall and the White House. Previously, we presented a concert at Arlington's Town Hall featuring works of Hovhaness. On October 20th, we will be honored to host Ms. Pompili at the Armenian Cultural Foundation for a solo recital of Hovhaness piano compositions. Alessandra Pompili is a talented Italian pianist known for her beautiful and meaningful performances and strong support for classical music. People worldwide have enjoyed her music, from Europe and the United States to Korea and Australia. She also shares her love for classical music through radio programs on Vatican Radio, where she plays timeless masterpieces. Pianist Pompili focuses on Alan Hovhaness' diverse piano works in her latest recording, showcasing his unique style as a contrapunist, Eastern Impressionist, and musical alchemist. Her thoughtful and expressive performances bring Hovhaness' music to life. She has recorded 2 CDs of Hovhaness piano works, and you can find out more about her and her recordings on her website, alessandrapompili.com. Thanks, Alessandra, for spending time and sharing your knowledge with us today.
Good morning for you, good afternoon here. And as a classical pianist, I obtained my diploma in piano performance from the Conservatoire in L'Aquila. Then I went to study in Paris and with Marcella Cordelli, who's a very renowned pianist, specialist in Italian keyboard music and specialist in Chopin. And in Paris, I studied at the École Normale de Musique de Paris, Alfred Cortot. Then I went back to study with my teacher at the Conservatoire, Sergio Calligaris, who was a wonderful performer, but he was also a composer. And that gave me a particular insight into looking at works, looking at compositions. Calligaris himself was a pupil of Hindemith, so he was extremely attentive to work structures, musical structure. This is something that equipped me. Of course, I didn't know at the time, but that is something that equipped me later when I got in touch with the music of Alan Hovhaness. And another pianist that I studied with is Arnaldo Graziosi. He was much older than me, but he was a wonderful performer, and I always love to remember him.
So what sparked your interest in Hovhaness music, and how were you first introduced to his compositions?
Well, I must say, shame on me. When I first met, let's say, Alan Hovhaness, I didn't know anything about him. It was a chance encounter that probably took place around 2004, 2005, let's say 20 years ago, perhaps a little less than 20 years ago. And I met this wonderful American pianist, Martin Berkowski. And it wasn't the encounter with Martin Berkowski that changed it all for me, because Martin had been the pianist of the Long Island Chamber Ensemble. And this was an ensemble that had met composer Alan Hovhaness, had started a long-standing cooperation with Alan Hovhaness. So Martin Berkowski then, from, let's say, a kind of working cooperation, then developed a friendship, a very strong friendship with Alan Hovhaness. And when I met with Martin, he started talking about this composer, Alan Hovhaness. What do you know? What music do you know about Alan Hovhaness? I have to say, I was really ashamed. I said, well, Martin, frankly, said, don't worry, I will introduce you to him. And what happened is that I started receiving envelopes upon envelopes of scores by Alan Hovhaness. Now, still nowadays, the vast majority of the scores by Alan that I have come from Martin Berkowski. So it was this wonderful pianist that introduced me to him. And that was a discovery, absolute discovery. It was fantastic. I mean, he was a contemporary composer. And as I said, I'd been working with a contemporary composer myself. But here was somebody who was doing things in a very different way. So I was fascinated, I was mesmerized.
Now, Hovhaness grew up in a multicultural environment. How do you think this influenced his music?
Well, the multiculturalism of Alan Hovhaness, if you want, is well known because his father was Armenian, but then when he left Armenia, then he went into a sort of a personal journey. First went to Beirut, then he went to France, and then he finally arrived in the US. Alan Hovhaness's mother was of Scottish descent. So he already came from a multicultural family, but then he himself was attracted by other cultures since he was very young. So in Hovhaness, one senses this thirst for approaching the other, for knowing something about different cultures. And music is a preferred vehicle of knowledge for him.
For people who want to listen more of Hovhaness' work, can you think of particular examples where he's blended Western and Eastern musical influences in his compositions?
Yes. Nowadays, the name Alan Hovhaness has become almost a synonym of a bridge, no, uniting East and West. Well, and this is true, but then later I would like to say that this is just one aspect of his production. Then there is something else later that I would like to touch upon. But let's stay now on East and West. Various ways in which this East and West are actually combined. So, for example, there is a composition that he writes in 1959 after journeying in the Shalimar region. This composition is called Shalimar, Opus 177 for piano. And Shalimar is a suite, and a suite means just a composition that is divided into various movements. Let's keep it simple. When you listen to Shalimar, each movement is in dialogue with the other in a very special way, because Shalimar opens with a fantasy which is reminiscent of Eastern modes and Eastern tradition. But then after the fantasy, you have a first interlude, what Hovhaness calls interlude, and it is a polyphonic piece of music. And polyphony is the Western tradition. Then he has a composition that is based on Indian mode, so he has an Eastern tradition. After that, he has a second interlude, so he has once again a Western tradition. So this is a composition where there is a constant alternation between a Western and Eastern, Western and Eastern. It's almost a dialogue between two traditions, and it is fascinating because it is almost as if he's saying these two are very different, and yet they can live one beside the other, and they can talk.
Go ahead. For people who love classical music, and especially the old masters, how would you compare Hovhaness' work with the old masters, Bach, Beethoven, Liszt, Chopin?
This is the $1 million question, in the sense that if I had the answer, probably I would even be more than millionaire. I would be a billionaire. Mine is not a diplomatic answer, in the sense that I think this is almost an impossible question, because all composers are unique. They all are sons, let's say, of particular historical and cultural situation, and the music responds differently to the context they live in. So it is not that I do not want to answer you, Alan, but I think I would prefer to, rather than compare, I would prefer to look at the specific. What is the specific of this composer? What is the specific of this? And in Hovhaness, yes, one of the big specifics is this bridge between East and West. But the other huge specific, in my opinion, is the simplicity. It's the clarity. This is something programmatic in Hovhaness. It is not that he writes clearly because he doesn't know what else to do. No, he has a project, he has a plan about this.
This will probably be equally impossible, but can you compare Hovhaness' music with more contemporary composers, you know, Stravinsky, Copland?
Oh, well, you will certainly know, because I know that you are a fan of Alan Hovhaness, so I know that you know his life. So I'm sure that you remember that Alan Hovhaness was sharply criticized by some contemporary composers, especially Bernstein and Copland. So they defined Alan Hovhaness' music as ghetto music, which is very derogatory.
Yeah, I think they were jealous.
It is a way also Bernstein and Copland themselves have different ways of interpreting Americanness. Yeah? And Alan Hovhaness, yes, is of Armenian descent. His position is very special because he's a half Armenian American. He's a first generation. So also his idea of what is to be American, what is to be Armenian, is probably very, very specific, very unique to him. Certainly, when you ask me, so what is your idea of Alan Hovhaness when you look at the big pantheon of the 20th century composers? Well, I think that Alan Hovhaness deserves to be much better known. This is my opinion. And not just because, and it's not just because I'm biased. Yes, I am biased. But I think I'm biased with a reason.
Yeah. Well, how can you discuss the balance that Hovhaness found between the Armenian nationalism and the other, you know, the worldwide influences, how he found the balance between them?
You say this is, once again, I think that we haven't put enough attention on the particular political, the wider historical picture in which Alan Hovhaness lived. Now, Hovhaness was born in 1911. He started composing at a very, very early age. He went through a period, he went through actually quite a dramatic sort of discovery of his own voice. He met with Jan Sibelius, the Finnish composer whom he always regarded as a great star. Then he destroyed a lot of his early works. Still when he was in the US, he was very keen and dipping into different cultural traditions, not only the Middle Eastern, but also the Greek and also the Indian. At some point in the 1940s, he discovers his Armenian roots. Then we said he was also sharply criticized. So here we have the signs of somebody who has been fighting to find his own voice. And when he found his own voice, when you look at the cultural context, Hovhaness was doing exactly the opposite of what other composers were doing. So all this turmoil that I've been talking about takes place around 1930s, 1940s, Well, 1930s and 1940s, I don't think I have to remind anybody that these are times when nationalism is rife. It is rife in Europe, I mean, especially after World War One. It was the triumph of the nationalism, and this came at a huge cost in terms of human lives. Now, Hovhaness was born in a country in the United States, which is geographically far from all the nationalism that is shaking Europe, but politically is not particularly far from it. His own father had left Turkey at the time of the early persecution of the Armenians. So whilst Europe is actually looking, Western music is looking at nationalism, Hovhaness is saying, I want to look outside. I want to see what happens outside. Now, nowadays, we talk about multicultural. It's almost a platitude, this term, multiculturalism. At that time, I think it wasn't. And yes, what happened abroad, especially in the East, could be seen as sort of exotic, if you want, but then as a curiosity, perhaps. But I think that anything that was not national then was also seen with high degree of suspicion. So that's why I'm saying I think that in this way, Hovhaness was a pioneer. Whilst everybody was looking in, was looking out. Yeah. I don't know whether, does it make any sense what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it brings up a new perspective in looking at his work. That's almost a political perspective that
yes.
He was, well, as you say, everybody was looking in their own yards. He was
yes.
looking in the entire world, and I could see that could potentially be controversial at the time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that this is also what, this is also something that prompted the famous ghetto criticism. I mean, what is this composer trying to do, really?
Yeah, far from me to criticize Bernstein or Copland, but I think maybe they were wearing blinders.
Of course not.
Sorry.
No, of course not, because they are wonderful composers, but clearly the perspectives here were completely different. This is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, that's a very interesting perspective. When you're performing Hovhaness music, what challenges do you encounter, and how do you work with it? I think it's very difficult music.
Hovhaness's music is incredibly deceptive. So Martin Berkowski, as I was saying, sent me all these scores, and I remember looking at them, pages after pages, and thinking, oh, this is simple. Oh, well, this is easy. Then you put them onto the keyboard, and you would try, and then, of course, yes, the writing is extremely clear, but it is what is behind the writing that becomes incredibly complex. So the music, if we just stay at the notes, then it is something that is not necessarily challenging. But then the music by Alan Hovhaness requires a way of breathing. You have to breathe into the music, into the score. You have to find, with Martin Berkowski, we would have endless talks. Fortunately, it was already at the time when there was WhatsApp, because otherwise the phone bill would be huge. We would have these endless talks about not only the notes, but the silence in between the notes, you know? So silence and music and silence. This is on one level. On another level, there is a big number of compositions that technically are very challenging, because Hovhaness, it didn't only look at the Eastern tradition, study the Eastern tradition. Alan Hovhaness liked to learn traditional instruments, so especially on string instruments, and he learned quite a few of them. And sometimes he tries to reproduce, to ask us performers, oh, now I would like you to imitate this and this instrument. But of course, the keyboard and the piano, it has its own limitations. So when I'm asked to imitate a stringed instrument, yes, I need first to have an excellent piano, of course, but I also need to study that particular technique. This is something that you don't find in mainstream composers. So there are aspects, technical aspects in Alan Hovhaness that require a very focused approach. This is for the technical challenge. Then there is a completely different aspect, which is putting together a program of music by Alan Hovhaness. So you said I recorded 2 CDs. Yes. I took a huge amount of time in selecting what I wanted to put into these CDs. Not because I didn't have material, because paradoxically I had too much. So, and because Hovhaness wrote compositions in different styles. So I wanted to have recordings that mirror the difference in styles. So that made justice of the fantasy and the genius of this composer. So there are various challenges, I would say. Sometimes I can say sometimes it can also be frustrating. but it's a good frustration. It's a good frustration because you learn out of it.
Yeah. How do you get young people, both listeners and performers, interested in Hovhaness? And I don't know if you teach, but if you teach, how do you help new pianists get comfortable with that? As you say, it's quite challenging.
Yes, it might be. What I always do, I can say what I do, because I don't think that I have the universal formula. But every time that I put up a recital, and I know that in the program, in my recital program, there is something that is not particularly well known, that the audience may have some doubts about. So I have no reticence, and I talk to the public, and I explain very briefly, very simply, what they are going to listen to. And I found that the response is always extremely positive, because contemporary music, unfortunately, suffers from this aura of being impenetrable. Oh, it's ugly. Many people say, oh, contemporary, oh, it's just ugly. Well, it doesn't have to be the case. No, sometimes this is not true, and certainly for the music of Alan Hovhaness. So you have to, instead of just serving it as a dish, no, here, take it, this is the music. I like to introduce it and say, well, listen to this. This is a composer who's trying to do something different, and yet in a language that we all understand, in a way that is approachable to us. So this is what I try to do when I'm in public. With my students, it's infinitely easier, because Hovhaness's music, as I said, technically, it presents some challenges. So you would say, let's look at this particular composition. Look, it has this particular kind of drill that we have to be working about. You don't find it in many other composers. You find it in here. And then after you get into the drill, then I always go into the interpretation. Now let's look, why does he do that? He's imitating the song of a bird, he's imitating this instrument, he's imitating this, he's imitating that. And I find that young children, young people, they have a huge amount of imagination. So this works with them, because it is a music that is, in a way, it is visual. Not all of it. Some of it is very visual. Yeah. And so people would oh, no, yes, I can see this, I can see that, I can see the birds flying at the sky.
Yeah.
So it is easy, it is difficult, as I said, he has his own challenges. But then once people get in, then it can become very, very easy.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons I enjoy listening to his music so much, is because there's so many layers of you know, the
Yes.
technical aspects and the harmony and the rhythm, and the you know, the technical parts of the music, the notes, and then there's the layers above that of the feeling and the influences and seeing the birds. And I think that's that's what makes it so interesting, and you can listen over and over again.
But then you say, Alan, you're saying something, you have mentioned the word, a key word here, which is layers. Now, certainly you know what Hovhaness wrote in his application for the Guggenheim Fellowship in 1940. And I'm going to read it just a tiny bit. And he wrote, I propose to create a heroic, monumental style of composition, simple enough to inspire all people, completely free from fads, artificial mannerisms. So says it has to be monumental and heroic, but then it has to be simple in the sense of accessible. Mm-hmm. And he says, and here he distances himself from many other composers of the 20th century, says, it is not my purpose to supply a few pseudo-intellectual musicians and critics with more food for brilliant argumentation. Now, so I'm not interested in what other people are doing, sort of what many people interpret as the ugly music. Let's translate it. I'm not interested in that, the hyper-intellectual that nobody understands and nothing about. But rather, and my purpose is rather to inspire all mankind with new heroic spiritual nobility. And to do that, you have to be, as I said, accessible. That's why when you were talking about layers, so there is a top layer, which is not simplistic, mm-hmm. but it is accessible. And to be able to do that, I think it is extremely difficult. It's not easy to sound easy, if you know what I mean. Sorry.
Yeah. No, I think it's much easier to write music that is difficult and almost offensive, and you don't really want to listen to it very much.
Yeah, well, something where to get into an understanding, then you have to know the content, you have to know so much, that in a way, then the music then disappears. Yeah. No? Then the music that gets behind the screen, and you have to have so much of the contextualization. This is also true for contemporary art. Yeah. This is why many people find this oh, I don't understand that. Yeah. Because it always requires this, a medium, if you want, somebody that mediates. No? Yeah. Alan Hovhaness didn't want anybody to mediate. He wanted to speak directly. And I think this is the other point that makes his music wonderful. But he talks directly.
Yeah, I completely agree. So what do you think his influence has been on later composers, and what his legacy will be 100 years from now, 200 years from now?
Well, sometimes it's easy enough for us when we think of the mainstream composers and we say, oh, and this composer wrote of this and this other wrote in the style of that. Well, with Alan Hovhaness, frankly, I am not particularly sure. I remember my first CD, there was one very good review, and the title was something like a CD dedicated to Alan Hovhaness, a rara avis in music. Rara avis is a rare bird. And this is true in the sense that Alan Hovhaness, up to now, remains as a unique phenomenon for the way in which he, as I said, the way in which he encapsulated foreign elements, foreign in the sense of non-American, non-Western element, and sometimes into a Western kind of language. I think that, and I hope that his music will survive, and will survive not only because of this thirst, of this push to look outside, but also for its intrinsic beauty. It is beautiful music. Many people, as I said, when I perform it, there are people who come there and thank me because we didn't know that contemporary music could be like this, could be as beautiful as this. So it becomes a discovery also for other people, I think. No, so there is an element of beauty, and Alan Hovhaness in this was very. He wanted his music to be beautiful. Yeah. So there's something. I might think that I have romantic ideas, that I may have idealistic ideas. No, I think I want to have my music beautiful. So.
That's good. So you feel like you have and I feel like you have a real personal connection to Hovhaness music, and I'm wondering, how has that impacted you, your career, and your performance styles?
Oh, immensely. To me, as I said, shame on me, I didn't know Alan Hovhaness before. Yes, I may have been partially justified. I'm justifying myself, because in Italy especially, Hovhaness is not known. So I have done programs for Vatican Radio. Of course, I have recorded Alan Hovhaness for Vatican Radio, but it doesn't remain a very famous century composer. But his impact on me, as I said, it has been absolutely immense. It has been immense on the technical, because he opened a completely new forefront in terms of technical ability. I found having to drill and re-drill formulas that I'd never found even in, I don't know, Beethoven, Chopin, or Liszt. So even in great pianists, I'd never found something that I'd found in Alan Hovhaness. So even in the technicism, I had to retrain in a way. But then also in the concept that he has of music. So you feel that you have to be there, and you have to have an enormous control into what you are doing. In order to convey properly, you have to be extremely, not only confident, but you have to have an amount of technical ability that is huge. So in this sense, his impact has been, as I said, absolutely immense. And I was also I was privileged, because with Martin Berkowski, as I said, Martin worked with Alan Hovhaness, and Hovhaness also dedicated some works to Martin. I have some beautiful letters that Alan Hovhaness wrote to Martin saying, "You have found the kind of sound that I was looking for." And because I was a great friend of him, I was honored to be a friend of Martin. Martin also passed his knowledge of Alan to me. This is what Alan would be looking for. This is what Alan would be searching for. And for me, this was absolutely invaluable, as you can imagine.
Can you recall any discussions with Martin about Hovhaness that we can share with our audience and maybe inspire listeners and other performers the way they inspired you?
Well, You're asking me to go back in my memory in years and years. But there was one, now that I think about it, when I first came to the United States, and I played, and I also recorded with Martin Berkowski. We recorded for the Armenian Cultural Foundation, we recorded the fourth movement, the transcription for piano, four hands, of the fourth movement of a symphony by Hovhaness, All Men Are Brothers. And the transcription was fantastic. But then with Martin, there was, I didn't know the symphony. Hovhaness wrote many symphonies. And as you know, he wrote more than 500 opus numbers. So even having, let's say, a full knowledge of his music would almost take a lifetime. But I remember talking to Martin, this All Men Are Brothers. So why is that? It's a very peculiar title. You can call it French, you can call it, but All Men Are Brothers. So we talked a lot, and I remember Martin reading to me the preface. Hovhaness sometimes wrote on top or as a preface to his scores, wrote something about his inspiration, or, for example, something that he wanted to say. And about this particular symphony, he talked of mankind as if everybody was into the same spaceship and going all together, traveling all mankind all together towards the same destination, which is why all men are brothers. And I found that incredibly inspirational. So we were saying earlier about a political, you can also find a political layer into all this. Hovhaness was incredibly strong in his idea of mankind as a one family only. So this was incredibly important for him. He was very, he was fearful about nuclear weapons. This is something that he said very clearly in interviews. And he was fearful for the generations to come. So what is the heritage that we are living then? We are not living them an heritage of friendship, of humanity altogether. So All Men Are Brothers, the symphony, is absolutely stunning in the music. And when you look at the idea behind it, the idea of humanity, that makes it something special. And that, as I said, I played it in this uncommon version, four hands version, transcription of the last movement, and it was an unforgettable experience.
I think that's an aspect of Hovhaness music and life and works that is, I think, really unique, and we need to explore that more and make it better known, because I think that it's very inspirational and will bring people to his music and his world.
I think that, sorry to interrupt you, yes, because I think that music for Hovhaness, yes, it can be used as an entertainment. Every music can be used as an entertainment. But I think that his idea of music was something much more than entertainment. It was something inspirational.
Sounds like the music was a means to maybe a bigger, a larger goal.
Making humanity better, making mankind better.
Yeah, that's...
mankind can aspire to do much more.
Yeah, and you can see in the 40s in his time and through the Cold War and today. That's a very important message.
Yes, and he lived through that, because, as I said, he was born in 1911. Certainly, he had there was the experience of his father already as a minority, And the father had managed to go to the United States at the very beginning, let's say, of the problems that the Armenians were suffering. But certainly there was an echo in all that. And then, of course, Hovhaness lived through the wars and the Cold War, which is something, as I said, it left a deep impact onto him.
Yeah, yeah. So, do you have any projects coming up for Hovhaness? Any aside from the October 20th recital? Any more recordings or?
Hovhaness is always around me, so there is always something to do. But my
Anything you're
first
particularly
two CDs,
excited about?
Oh yeah, but my first two CDs have been as a soloist, and now I would like to do something different. So I would also like to do to record music along with others, especially in duo, violin, clarinet, perhaps even double bass. But something that I enjoy quite a lot is radio work. And as you can see, I can chat. I can chat quite a lot. So I enjoy radio work, and I found out that when I did my programs on Alan Hovhaness for Vatican Radio, we had people calling in and asking, well, who is this composer? We never heard anything about it. So if there was some radio work, I would gladly go for it, because I think it is one of these ways, one of the ways to make him, to sort of to share his music, to disseminate his music. It doesn't take much more than that, I think.
Yeah. Well, Alessandra, I'm very pleased to meet you, even though we're thousands of miles away. I really look forward to meeting you in person when you come to Arlington in October.
Me too.
I encourage everyone to visit AlessandroPompili.com. Learn more about Alessandra, her recordings, her works. There are many performances on YouTube, and I really encourage people to look at it, and of course, explore more about the life and the works of Alan Hovhaness. Just want to.
Well, Alan, thank you very, very much. Thank you for your passion, and thank you to everybody who had this idea of making these programs about Alan Hovhaness. Thank you for inviting me, but thank you even more for what you're doing for this wonderful composer who has so much to say, even to the world nowadays.
Well, thank you, and we have a lot of work to do, and a lot of there's a lot we can do to do this, especially since we're in his hometown. And I also want to thank Michael Armanius for bringing this together, Arlington Community Media to make this possible with all this good technology. And I hope the rest of your day is great, and maybe it'll cool off a little bit. So.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Alessandra.